And then there was a story a couple of days ago. I think we talked about it briefly on Friday, where an appeals court ruled that the government likely violated the First Amendment rights of Americans in their vaccine misinformation campaign. And I think this is a big deal. Like, it's a big deal when a federal court says, hey, you're violating the Constitution. You can't do that. So I want to get to the bottom of that and the Missouri versus Biden decision with Mark Chenoweth. He's the president and general counsel at New Civil Liberties Alliance. Mark Chenoweth, welcome, sir.
Good to be with you, Rich.
You bet. So let's dig into this. Tell us about the case, how it came about, and of course, we'll get into some of your analysis on it as well.
Sure. Well, the case came about originally. The attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana filed suit against the Biden administration because they recognized that what was happening not only to their own social media posts, but also to the social media posts of folks in their jurisdictions, was that they were being, reduced in different kinds of ways. They were being either deplatformed. You had folks getting thrown off, or you had folks who were getting throttled, or all these other terminologies that are used to basically ways of censorship. And I think folks originally thought this was happening as a result of the private conduct of the various social media platforms, but I think the attorneys general had an inkling that maybe there was some state action behind this as well. And the New Civil Liberties Alliance got involved because there were several private plaintiffs that were interested in being part of the lawsuit as well. The state AGs couldn't represent private plaintiffs, and so the New Civil Liberties Alliance had a different lawsuit that we had been working on that was somewhat similar. And so they immediately thought of us to come into this lawsuit and join them in the lawsuit against the federal government. So we represent Doctors Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Koldorf, Aaron Cariotti, and Miss Jill Hines in the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit.
Now, break it down, because I think some of the headlines can be a little misleading, saying that, the government likely violated the First Amendment rights of end users. Is it likely? Did they do it? Did they not? I'm not sure how to come down on that.
Sure. So the reason why some of the news articles talk about the likelihood is because this is at the preliminary injunction stage. And so the legal question that you have to establish in order to get an injunction is you have to prove that the government more likely than not was guilty of this conduct. And so that's why they talk about it in terms of likelihood. But both the district court and the Court of Appeals looked at the evidence and said, look, the evidence shows, and the district court was even stronger in this, but even at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the evidence shows that the government was censoring people. And in other words, it wasn't the independent actions of Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms. It was the government reaching out to these social media platforms and telling them, hey, you need to take that down. And when they didn't take it down, calling back and saying, hey, I thought we told you to take that down. And when they still didn't take it down in one or two cases, saying, getting really angry with them and saying, what's it going to do? What's it going to take to get you to take this down, kind of thing. And it was very coercive kinds of actions on the part of certain folks at the White House, like Rob Flaherty, certain folks at the Centers for Disease Control, the U.S. Surgeon General, even Jen Psaki from the podium there at the White House. There was lots of this sort of legal terminology, significant encouragement toward the platforms to take down certain kinds of things they didn't like.
So what type of relief are you seeking? We've had Dr. Bhattacharya on the show. He's terrific and has told us his story of how they, kind of wiped him out. And obviously not the same situation, but the same situation in many ways. What happens now? I mean, they can't turn back the hands of time. I guess they could say, yeah, they were wrong. But is there? How do we punish the bad guys?
Well, that's a good question, Rich. And in terms of punishing the government, it's hard to do. But what we can do is we can get an injunction that prevents them from doing it again. And so that's what the form of relief that's being sought here is to essentially put them on notice that your conduct is unconstitutional. You can't do this. And then if they try to seek, if they try to hide behind immunity in the future, it'll be a lot harder for them to do that because there will already be a court ruling saying that your conduct is unconstitutional. You've been put on notice. And so if they continue to do it, then there's an opportunity to potentially go after some of these individuals, not in their official capacity, which this lawsuit does, but to go after them in their individual capacity for the illegality that they're involved in. And so that's the point of this lawsuit, is to hopefully put them on notice, get them to stop their illegal conduct.
Makes sense. And I got a couple of follow-up questions, but I'm going to hold them for right after the break so that we can take a quick pause here and give out the phone number. So, folks, I want to remind you that we're on with Mark Chenoweth. He's the president and general counsel for New Civil Liberties Alliance. And our phone number, if you want to join us, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDÉS.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdés. Call now, 833-4-VALDÉS. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDÉS. That's Valdés with an S.
Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdés.
So on Friday, a U.S. appeals court ruled that several government entities, including the White House, the FBI, the Surgeon General, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, likely violated the First Amendment by pressuring social media companies to moderate their content on what they called misinformation regarding vaccines. This decision on Friday is from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, saying that the government actors, quote, likely coerced or encouraged, end quote, social media companies to moderate their content, affirming a decision by a lower court with respect to the White House, the FBI, the CDC, and the Surgeon General. That's reported in The Hill. And my question for our guest, and our guest, by the way, is Mark Chenoweth. He's the general counsel and president at New Civil Liberties Alliance. And my question is, and you kind of alluded to it, which was, if you succeed, and it seems like you will, the judges are like, yeah, these guys are out of control, no problem, it's on the record, don't do it again, and potentially go after these other people civilly. Does this not mean, it means nothing, right, for the actual social media companies?
Right. So we didn't sue the social media companies themselves, and the court recognized that the plaintiffs weren't challenging the social media platforms' content moderation policies because if they're truly acting on their own, then the First Amendment doesn't apply to them. They don't have to.
Right, they're private.
They're private. But that's not what was happening. They weren't acting on their own. Here we had the government's unlawful efforts influencing the enforcement of those policies, and that's what the court was very keen to pick up on. And in fact, Judge Dowdy called this arguably the most massive attack against free speech in United States history and akin to an Orwellian ministry of truth. So if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. This is a very serious violation, systematic violation of the First Amendment being perpetrated by the Biden administration in a coordinated censorship campaign against the American people. And they were doing it because they didn't like what people like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya were saying about COVID. They didn't like what some other people were saying about the Hunter Biden laptop. There were just certain topics that they wanted to shut people up on, and they did so.
Yeah, and the reason I ask about the social media companies is because when the Twitter files were released through Matt Taibbi, the sense I got was that there was a lot of incestuous relationships, and by that I mean a lot of government people that left government and went right into social media to work as their general counsel and whatnot. So I feel like, okay, so you slap on the wrist at the White House, but then you still have some of these same actors that are in the same place. And I'm asking for my own point of personal privilege. I shared a Hunter Biden story on Instagram about a week ago, maybe 10 days, and Instagram was like, you can't share that. And it was like an article in Breitbart News. And I thought, and I complained, and they restored my access. I think I'm still being like shadow banned or whatnot. But the point is, how do we stop them, or can we?
Yeah, great question, Rich. And it's going to be more difficult to stop these companies. In some cases, there may be opportunities to do it with litigation if they're violating the contractual terms that they have with the folks who use those platforms. In other cases, we may have to switch to other platforms that are willing to honor folks' First Amendment rights. And then there may be some legislative solutions as well. You already have jurisdictions like Texas that have talked about, saying, look, they're not going to allow these companies to censor this kind of information on any kind of discriminatory basis. And we may need a sort of new civil rights legislation that doesn't allow companies to discriminate based on viewpoint. But we're not there yet, and frankly, I'd like to see how these companies behave when the government isn't in their business and threatening them all day long.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that's something I've thought about long and hard. I worked in government once, and I was treated differently because of my political views. And I remember I didn't have a lot of options. I tried to talk my way out of it, and eventually I just went and I said, these people are just treating me the wrong way. And they were like, were they doing it based on race or this or that? And they were like, nope, politics isn't a protected category, so you're on your own.
Right.
And it always stuck with me that I think that would be the fix here for really allowing the First Amendment to flourish, is to include viewpoint in those protected categories. What's the likelihood or reality of something like that happening?
Well, I don't know that there's a likelihood of it at the federal level anytime soon, but that may not be necessary. If there's just a couple of states out there that are willing, and Texas has been taking a lead on this so far, to say, look, companies, you can't treat our citizens this way. You can't operate in our space. You're the new public square. You're a kind of utility or a common carrier of sorts. And just as we don't allow hotels, for example, to discriminate and say on the basis of race or what have you, you can't discriminate against the content on your site for these forbidden reasons. And that's not to say that they wouldn't continue to have control over most of what's up there, but if they're going to choose to moderate what's on their site, they can't do so in a discriminatory way. But I just want to stress again, I don't know that that's the problem, because we've seen, the vast network, just 17 different agencies were involved here in terms of suppressing or reducing speech in a very coordinated way. And the Fifth Circuit upheld a preliminary injunction against a handful of those. And let's see what happens now. I think the Twitter files were very helpful in exposing this. This lawsuit has been helpful in exposing the extent of what's going on here. And I think if we can get the government to back off and stop violating people's First Amendment rights, then that'll create the space for the companies to do the right thing, and then we'll see whether they do or not.
Right, and I guess it also allows them to compete, right? If there's Truth Social and Rumble and other platforms that are willing to take free speech for what it's worth, and people start to make those decisions to go with one versus the other, they may decide to say, all right, let's be more competitive and be respectful of free speech. So that's a possibility. I just have very little faith when it comes to some of these companies. Now, I want to know a little bit more about the organization, New Civil Liberties Alliance, the one where you are the general counsel and president. This is a great case and amazing work that you're doing. What else are you guys up to?
Oh gosh, we're suing the government on so many different topic areas. We have lawsuits against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau over the unlawful way in which that agency is funded through the Federal Reserve. We have a lawsuit against the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Marine Fisheries Service over its effort to try to force boats in the Atlantic Ocean to pay for at-sea monitors. So it's almost like having to pay for a cop to ride alongside you in your car to write you tickets for speeding. It's a very weird situation with that particular agency. We have a lawsuit against the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms over the bump stock ban that was actually put into effect originally during the Trump administration, where they're trying to pretend that bump stocks are machine guns, which they're not. And our particular concern with that is you can't have federal agencies rewriting statutes that Congress wrote. That's Congress's job. And so we're suing the ATF over that. But really we're 6 years old this month at the New Civil Liberties Alliance.
Happy birthday.
Founded. Thank you. We were founded by Philip Hamburger, who's a law professor up there in New York City and at Columbia Law School. And our goal is to put constitutional guardrails around the actions of these federal agencies. So when they do things like try to force you to go through an administrative proceeding instead of going against you in federal court, and they take away your jury trial rights, and they take away all the due process that you would ordinarily have in a real court, then we're suing to stop that. We're saying, look, if an agency wants to enforce something against you, it has to do so in a real court with a real jury and so forth.
Let everybody know the website really quick, Mark.
Sure, nclalegal.org, nclalegal.org.
Folks, Mark Chenoweth, president at nclalegal.org. Check him out, support him, do what you can. Mark, I want to thank you for joining us. You're a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Rich.
You bet. All right, folks, we're coming right back. Don't go anywhere. There's more to come.